Hi everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. Well, here we are in November, and like every November, you got your sunny days and cold weather. We've just survived a huge fall storm, if you will, and apparently in this area, we were sort of between two belts, as they got hit a lot harder up around the northern part of the state, especially up in Chittenden County, Franklin County, New Orleans County, and up in the Northeast Kingdom, and down below us, down around Bennington and Brattleboro, Bellows Falls, that area. So once again, being in between two areas, I think we lucked out. We are between two snow belts, as they usually have more snow north of us, and then more snow south of us. Usually get up around talk about a snow belt. It's usually between Pittsford and Brandon that you see a difference in snow. There's more snow north of us until you, probably get up around Ferrisburg or Charlotte. And there, the lake effect from Lake Champlain delays the onset of winter just a little bit coming into Chittenden County. And by the same token, as we get into spring, they're more apt to have snow than we are because, again, the lake effect, it's snow generated by the cold air over the lake that comes in and affects Franklin and North Chittenden County. But we lucked out on this storm. Well, talking on a more pleasant venue, if you will, let's talk a little bit about high school football, with the championships coming down this Saturday. And two schools. Well, now let me see now. I think 4 schools where I've taught driver ed at one time or another are all involved in championship play this weekend, which will take place at Alumni Field up at Rutland High School. In Division III, it's going to be Poultney and BFA of Fairfax. Again, I spent 21 years teaching driver ed at Poultney, and I spent one summer doing a summer program up at BFA in Fairfax. During the regular season, Fairfax beat Poultney 6-0, but because Fairfax got beat by Otter Valley, that had been hammered by Poultney, Poultney is the #1 seed. Fairfax #2. It'll all be a rematch at Alumni Field, and I'm not sure which game it's going to be. The Division II, I spent 3 years at Bellows Falls, and they are back in the Division II finals. This time they're going to be playing their next-door neighbor in Windham County, Brattleboro. And Brattleboro went through undefeated and defeated Bellows Falls in the regular season. I believe it was 49-26 was the final score. So they're going to have a rematch at Alumni Field. Of course, that was the first game of the season, and Bellows Falls has improved quite a bit since then. And the Division I game will be between Burton Burton, where I taught for a number of summers, and St. Johnsbury Academy, which is coached by the first football coach at Castleton University. After he left Castleton, a year or two later, he wound up building a football program at St. Johnsbury Academy. And he's done a great job. They have 1 state title, 1 runner-up, and now they're going to try for their 2nd state title. During the regular season, St. Johnsbury defeated Burton Burton 50-38. And Burton Burton was Division II up until this year. They came into Division I, everybody wondered how they were going to do. Well, they virtually, with a high-powered offense, they virtually blew some of these Division I schools, off the field. And they've gone into the finals by defeating Hartford, which is a traditional power in Division I. In fact, they routed them. I think it was something like 49-29. Middlebury, which was undefeated all season, Middlebury was favored, and Burton Burton went up and beat them 54-39. So a rematch, Division I, between St. Johnsbury and Burton Burton. Well, let's turn to the national scene. You know, the New England Patriots lost their first game of the season last night. They're now 8-1. They pretty well got manhandled by the Baltimore Ravens. You know, Baltimore jumped out to a 17-0 lead, and they managed to maintain a lead all through the game. The Pats came close a couple times, but never quite got up. They came within 4 points at the start of the fourth quarter, but then Baltimore turned the heat on again and won it 37-20. So the Pats are 8-1. And baseball. Well, I think what happened this year in the World Series is good for baseball. At the beginning of the year, if anybody had said the Washington Nationals were going to wind up as world champions in 2019, I think you would have been laughed off the surface of the earth. At one time, this team was in the cellar, the National League East. But they made a few deals here and there. They got their act together. They came back. They finished second to Atlanta in the National League East. They won the play-in game over Milwaukee. Went on to knock off top-seeded Dodgers. They blew out the St. Louis Cardinals, who had upset the Atlanta Braves. They blew them out in 4 straight. And they went into the World Series as heavy underdogs. In fact, a lot of people, including yours truly, thought Houston would probably sweep them in 4 straight, but it didn't work out that way. The strange thing about this World Series is that the visiting team won all 7 games. Washington went into Houston, took the first 2 in Houston. Series came back to Washington, and Houston took the 3 that were played in Washington to take a 3-2 lead. Go back to Houston, everybody said, well, Houston's going to wrap it up. They've won 3 in a row. They're going to wrap it up. Didn't happen that way. As you know, Washington won games 6 and 7, and they are the 2019 baseball world champions. They're also the oldest team in Major League Baseball. They had a few youngsters thrown in, like their left fielder there, Dominique Soto, whose 21st birthday occurred during the World Series. Well, other than that, the majority of their players are in their early to mid-30s, which in baseball is old. Not from my point of view, where I'm standing or living, but in terms of baseball, you get into your 30s, you're considered to be a veteran or an old man. And the Nationals put together a few deals. They got the right combination. You know, it's like putting together a picture puzzle. And you get the right pieces in the right spot, the whole thing falls together. The owner of the Washington Nationals is 94 years old. And had to be a great thrill for him at his age to be the owner of baseball's world champions. Well, this team of Nationals is the 3rd major league team that the city of Washington has had. The first one were known as the Senators, the Washington Senators. And they last won a World Series in 1924, which was 95 years ago. The second time they went to the World Series, 1933, and they lost to the New York Giants, who are now the San Francisco Giants. That team was owned by the Griffin family, or Griffith, Griffith. Clark Griffith, who was a multimillionaire, was the owner of that ball club. Well, when he died, the new owners purchased the team from the Griffith family, and they moved that franchise from Washington out to Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so that Washington Senators ball club are now the Minnesota Twins. Well, after they left, an expansion team was created for Washington. but they never really got off the ground. You know, they're pretty much the league doormat. And so the owners of that team, because they, you know, the idea of these guys going to baseball, it's not because they love the sport, although there is a love of the sport there. But the primary reason is to make a profit. It's a business. And they weren't making what they thought they should be. And so they took that Washington Senator team and they moved that to Dallas, Texas. And that team is now the Texas Rangers. The team that are the Washington Nationals came from Montreal. They were the Montreal Expos, an expansion team. They came in existence about the same time, well, surprisingly, the same time as the Houston, no, it wasn't the Houston Astros. The Astros and the New York Mets came in at the same time. And I'm trying to think who Montreal came in. I think Montreal came in the same time as San Diego, the San Diego Padres. But they were the Montreal Expos, and they had some fairly good ball clubs in Montreal. But the big sport in Montreal, of course, is hockey. And with an opening in Washington and the Major League Baseball really wanting a Major League team in the nation's capital, the Montreal Expos moved to Washington, and they became the Washington Nationals. And they are the 2019 baseball world champions. Well, as we're celebrating November here, two big holidays come up in November. First one, of course, is Armistice Day, or Veterans Day as we call it now. Years ago, when I was quite a bit younger than I am now, Armistice Day was more or less the concluding holiday of the summer season. That honor now goes to Halloween with that big Halloween parade. But on Armistice Day, the city had a big parade, and the big attraction on that day was a football game between Rutland High School and MSJ. And of course, over the years, Rutland High School, the Red Raiders, dominated the city series. There were a number of ties in there. I think there were 2 or 3 ties. But overall, Rutland dominated. And that held true right up till 1946. On an Armistice Day that was a bit chilly, rainy, muddy. Game played up at Flights Field, which is now the field behind what is now Rutland Middle School and Rutland Elementary School and everything else. That was Flights Field. And it was MSJ and Rutland, and MSJ defeated Rutland for the first time by a score of 12-6. A kid by the name of Funzie Chaffee scored both MSJ touchdowns. 1946, a lot of the guys playing high school football had returned from serving in the military in World War II. It was particularly the case with MSJ. Funzie Chaffee was probably one of the youngest members of that team. But many of these guys had been in the Army or been in the Navy and served World War II. And so it was kind of a veteran team. The way the thing was set up, if you hadn't completed your 4 years of high school football eligibility, and you went back to school to get your diploma, because many went into the military before they graduated, they were eligible to play football. And so it's kind of a veteran team that MSJ put on the field. The year before, in 1945, at St. Peter's Field, Rutland had defeated MSJ 2-0 on a safety. MSJ, again, it was Funzie Chaffee, scored touchdown, but it was called back because of an offside penalty against MSJ. The final result was, of course, Rutland winning on a safety. And I forget, I think maybe it was Funzie too, was tackled in the end zone, which gave Rutland their 2 points. Rutland won that one 2-0. Well, MSJ won their first win, 12-6. Their second win would come in 1949, 20-0, and then they'd go into a slight drought. But then come the late 50s, the 60s, the early 70s, MSJ dominated up until well, after the year 2000, when things began to change and the enrollment at MSJ began to drop, and the Mounties were no longer competitive. And very sadly, the Rutland MSJ series came to an end. There are some still long-standing series going on, but they really didn't have the momentum of the Rutland MSJ game. That was usually the last game of the was the last game of the year. And then, of course, in the late 60s and 70s, they decided to determine a state championship by having playoffs. And you had your 2 top teams in the South and 2 top teams in the North, and MSJ dominated that particular series for a while. The first time they had a playoff series, MSJ lost to Burlington up at Centennial Field, 20-14. Then they began their run for a series of state titles by beating Burlington, I think, in Game 5, which was played at Bellows Falls, and MSJ returned the favor and beat Burlington by the same, well, wait a minute, it was 19-16 Burlington beat MSJ. And MSJ turned around and beat Burlington 20-14 in the 5th game. Altogether, Mount St. Joseph won 16 state titles. And of course, that is a legacy that, due to circumstances and the way the situation is now, will never return. But Armistice Day, a big football game, Rutland MSJ, a big parade in the morning. And it usually began up Main Street Park and went down West Street and down Merchants Row, and then up East Washington Street, then back through the park over to the Rutland Armory where they had their speeches and all that sort of thing. Then there was a procession led by the Rutland City Band down to West Street Cemetery, and they would lay a wreath on one of the graves, and that was it till kickoff time, which was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it alternated back and forth, one year at St. Peter's Field, the other year up at Flights Field at the high school. Well, that is all ancient history now. Veterans Day originally signaled the end of World War I. World War I was known as the Great War. And the motto was, the war was fought to end all wars. But war is never a solution. And what one war does is plant the seeds for another war. The war began in 1914 with the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Ferdinand by a individual in Sarajevo, which now was part of Yugoslavia. And at that time, Austria and Hungary were joined together as one nation. And it was the Habsburg nobility family that ruled that particular section of the world. And the Archduke was the heir to the throne. I got it. The heir to the throne. And he was assassinated in Sarajevo by an anarchist. And as a result, that would trigger World War I, because there were a number of alliances that were set up. Russia was an ally. No, wait a minute. Austria-Hungary was an ally of Germany. Germany had become a united nation in 1870, less than 100 years old at that time, and they were still a very, very warlike nation. Well, once the Archduke was assassinated, And Germany came to the military support of Hungary-Austria. On the other side of the fence, France was very, very nervous about the rise of German militarism, especially since Germany had defeated France in the War of 1870, requested help, and they requested help from their ally Britain. Italy was worried about a military intervention from Austria-Hungary, so they joined France and Britain. And on the other side, Russia, which had pledged to support countries just outside of Hungary and Austria, joined the alliance with Britain, France, and Italy. Well, the Ottoman Empire was afraid of being annihilated. That was Turkey, so forth. So they allied themselves with Germany and Austria-Hungary. And thus the stage was set for World War I. And that assassination triggered it off. And the war was pretty much a stalemate. A lot of people were dying, a lot of killing going on. A sense of modern warfare, for the first time, involved aircraft. They were used as mainly for observation. They didn't have the very modern fighter planes that we have now. Usually, a fighter plane, the pilot would have a pistol. And they'd go up, and if you had what the so-called dogfight, they'd be firing pistols back and forth at each other. Well, Germany, who was always very, very inventive, came up with the ability to mount a machine gun on a plane. And that made their Air Force and their air attack very, very effective. Previous to that, if you put a machine gun on a plane, it shot off the propeller blades. And the plane would, boom, crash. That would be it. Among the great German war heroes was an aviator for the first time in history, and that was the Red Baron. And he was a baron. He was of German nobility. He was Prussian. And he organized the early version of the Luftwaffe, which was Germany's Air Force. And one of his young lieutenants that served under him in World War I was a man named Hermann Göring. As you know, Göring would become a close ally of Adolf Hitler and would be the leader of the Luftwaffe in World War II. Well, the war began in 1914 when the Germans began by invading Belgium. And from there they swept down into France. And you got into trench warfare. Neither side was gaining. They were losing a lot. Casualties were high. In 1917, the United States came to the rescue of the Allies. An American Expeditionary Force under the command of General John Pershing, Black Jack Pershing, went to France to come to the aid of the Allies. Well, they were able to put men over there. We didn't have the materials that we needed, so consequently, a number of French tanks, as tank warfare was beginning to develop in World War I. A number of French tanks were loaned to the United States for use of our expeditionary force. My late father-in-law was a machine gunner on that expeditionary force that went over to France. And it was trench warfare. The trenches were very dirty, very filthy. They were rat-infested, a lot of diseases. The great flu epidemic, which killed millions of people worldwide in 1918, 1919, 1920, started in the trenches of World War I. I know my father-in-law was gassed. The Germans used gas, both sides used gas in those days. But he also came back from the war with a lot of souvenirs, which they were allowed to bring back. They picked off the bodies of dead German soldiers, German Iron Cross, and other. One thing he brought back was the Luger pistol, which German officers carried. But World War I finally came to an end. Germany, pretty well beaten. The Ottoman Empire had been pretty well destroyed by British and French expeditionary forces. The war was a lot more successful in the Middle East from the Allies' point of view than it was from the Axis powers. And Germany, well, they were virtually cut off. And so both sides were tired of war. During the course of the war, the Red Baron had been shot down, and not by Snoopy, but by a Canadian pilot who had somehow or another outmaneuvered the Red Baron and shot his plane down. Well, the Red Baron, where he landed, where he crash landed, and it was probably the crash landing that killed him, behind Allied lines, and it happened to be a contingent from Australia, military unit from Australia. But what they did, even though this guy was part of the enemy, they gave him a military funeral. And they notified the Germans that the Red Baron had crashed and had died, and he was buried with very, very high military honors. One thing that was a bit unusual about World War I. Here these guys were fighting each other, killing each other. But on Christmas Eve, I believe in 1917, there was a truce. And because Christmas Eve, they came out of their trenches, and they visited with each other and talked with each other and had a Merry Christmas Eve. Then they went back in their trenches and started killing each other. But both sides were pretty well exhausted by war. Both wanted peace. So by mutual agreement, on November 11th, they met in a rail car at the town of Reims, France. And at the 11th hour, on the 11th month, an armistice was signed, ending hostilities in World War I. Well, as I said at the start, World War I was fought with the idea it would be the war to end all wars. But what it did was sow the seeds of the wars we even have now. The peace treaty that the Allies drew up at Versailles was very, very hard on Germany. The German Kaiser, while not arrested, he had to go into exile, and he went in exile into Holland. And that's where he died, Kaiser Wilhelm II. The British royal family, which was German, changed their name to Windsor. Became the House of Windsor. Actually, they were from Hanover, Germany, beginning with George I. He was a German prince at Hanover, and he came to England. Parliament invited him to England to assume the throne. And they maintained their German name right up until the start of World War I, when King George V changed their name to, it was Hohenzollern, and changed their name to Windsor. Well, with that, we come to the end of another program. Since a week from now is going to be Armistice Day or Veterans Day, we'll see you in 2 weeks. May Almighty God in His infinite wisdom continue to bless these United States of America. God love you, and have a great 2 weeks.